Hey guys, this is Nick, and Google has just made its move towards the gaming market. This move is called Stadia, and I think it's a bad one for consumers. So let's see what we already know about Stadia and what I think about this new service. Stadia is Google's terrible name for what used to be called Project Stream. Now, a name is subjective, I know, but come on, Stadia. I know it's the plural for stadium, but it sounds like a dairy product, and I mean, it's not a good name. The name is not important though, and what's important is what Stadia will allow you to do. And what it will allow you to do is game on any single device running Chrome, even though iOS compatibility has not been announced really or formally, and play with any Bluetooth-enabled controller or the dedicated Google controller. Now, they announced that the systems running this will be running Linux and Vulkan, so games will have to be ported to this machine, but it will run on dedicated cloud servers, and they will stream the video back to your device. Now, Google has announced that these servers have a computing power of about 10 teraflops, which is about what you would get by adding an Xbox One X and a PS4 Pro, which seems impressive and translates into 4K 60 FPS gaming. So that's good if it can hold these frame rates at any connection. It's a pretty solid gaming experience. Stadia will launch in 2019 in the US, in Canada, and in parts of Europe. And I think the rollout will be based depending on the connection speeds and data caps that they encounter from providers. Stadia will probably be a Netflix-style subscription service, but they have not confirmed that. They could go an ad-based route, which is you see ads to play games for free, but I don't think the margins on this business will allow them to pay publishers enough for that to be interesting. Now, there are some positives. The obvious one is that with a streaming service, you don't really need a dedicated gaming machine or gaming PC. A gaming console or gaming PC can be quite expensive, and if you try to game on Linux, it can also mean that your machine is quite underused. So in the end, Stadia will allow you to play on any hardware you already have, depending if you use Android or iOS, we don't really know that, and use any controller that you like to play at high frame rates and solid speeds and at least good graphics detail. So that's a good thing on paper. With Stadia, you could use any crummy old laptop or Android phone with a Bluetooth controller and play any games you would like, so that's a solid proposition. Except that's only true if all the games you want to play are available on Stadia, and if they're not, you might still want to buy a dedicated gaming machine to play them. So why bother with a subscription service if you can play all the games you want to play on that dedicated gaming machine? I see two problems with that. Stadia runs on Linux, and most publishers' games don't. Most publishers don't port their games on Linux. I love Linux gaming, but most of it today is through Proton and Steam Play and not really through native Linux games. At least not for AAA titles. I would imagine Google would strike deals with publishers, and they are already working on that since they apparently sent about 100 tryout machines that replicate the configuration of their data servers to publishers to try and get them to use the service. Now, while Stadia might have more broad market appeal than native Linux gaming would, I think it's still a little step too far to ask them to port their games on a platform that they don't support natively as of now. It might help give a boost to Vulkan, since that's what the games will use to run on Stadia. Now, a second big point is that Stadia would mean that you could start gaming on your TV and pick it up on your Android phone, on your Chromebook, or on any laptop running Chrome. That's a good selling point, especially on your phone, since you could imagine that with good 4G networks or 5G networks, you could start gaming on your phone on the go, and that would be pretty freaking awesome. Latency is touted as pretty low by Google, actually the lowest in the game streaming market. As of now, that's what they announced anyway. And their controller will pair through Wi-Fi directly to the server running the game, so this means that input lag should be reduced a lot. Now, we don't have the game service to try our hands on, so we don't know if that's true yet. But if they achieve that, it could be a very big improvement in the game streaming section, and it would provide a very good experience. Now, the second thing I see is that big publishers are starting to try and get more independent. They're moving out of big platforms. They're moving out of Steam. Epic Games, Battle.net, Origin, Uplay, they're all trying to build their own distribution software and communities. And I don't see them jumping with both feet on another gaming service that might decide how they are paid, how they can distribute their games, how long people can play them, with whom they can play them, because there's the crossplay issue as well. I think it might be a big problem that publishers are not really ready to overcome yet. Now, the controller they announced looks pretty terrible to me. Aesthetically, I don't really care, but they chose to go with the PS4 layout in terms of sticks and I think that the Xbox layout is a lot better suited to playing games, since you can just use this stick and use another finger to interact with the cross, which you cannot really do easily on a PS4 controller. Now finally, streaming games is a double-edged sword. While on the one hand, since you cannot modify the game files because they run on a server and not on your machine, this might limit the impact of cheaters on some online games. On the other hand, it might also mean that there will be no mod support or very limited mod support on Stadia, and modding is a big part of the PC gaming community, such a big part in fact that Xbox and PS4 are starting to enable modding for some games. Now the obvious negative for me is that Stadia will be probably a subscription-based service, which means that you will not own any of your games. So let's say Stadia closes its doors in 2 years. Well, you lose all your progress, all your games, and all the money you put in the service is just wasted. Now, if a publisher decides that Stadia doesn't make enough money for them, they could also pull all their games from the catalog, which is not a good thing either, because you would lose everything. And finally, if Google decides that this publisher is not good enough for their platform or doesn't make them enough money, they could just pull their games out of the catalog as well, and you would be left with games that you haven't finished, or even no games at all. Let's remember that the most sold games are probably the sport games like FIFA and the Call of Duty games, and these ones are pretty much forgotten as soon as the next one arrives, and people who play those games probably and generally never come back to the older version once the newer version has come out. So for them, having a way to play the most recent game without rebuying every time a $60 or $70 game is a good thing. But for people who like to revisit their games and play local multiplayer or play single-player campaigns, this is a big deal. I like to be able to revisit my games. I have a Mega Drive so that I can replay very old games I played when I was a kid. And I would not want my game library to be dependent on the goodwill of a certain publisher. Now, the subscription model also has a significant drawback. It will take time to convince publishers to bring their games to this catalog, and if Stadia doesn't have 100% of the game people want to play, well, they will still need another dedicated machine, and so that would negate the usefulness of having a subscription service. Just like Xbox Game Pass or PS Now, they will probably not have all the games that you want to play, and on Xbox or PlayStation it's not a big deal. You want a game that you cannot play with the Game Pass, you can just buy it digitally or physically and play it on the same machine. With Stadia, if the game is not available on the library, well, your machine doesn't run any other games, so you will not be able to play it at all. And that might drive people away from this, because they will still need another dedicated gaming machine. Now, some might argue that since Stadia runs on Linux and Vulkan, it might bring more publishers to bring their games natively on Linux, and I personally don't think that is the case. While they will make games that run on Linux and on Vulkan, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will bring them to a native Linux platform. Actually, I think that Google will secure exclusivity deals that prevent them from doing this exact same thing. So I think this is not a good thing for Linux gaming either, except that you will probably get another way to play Linux games on your machine. Now, you might have deduced from this video and what I said in it that I'm not a big fan of Stadia's concept on paper, and you would be right. I think having to deal with yet another provider of games is not a good thing for consumers. Generally, more competition means lower prices and more choice, but when you have exclusivity deals in play, and this is the route that the gaming community is taking, at least the gaming publishers are taking, well, this is just bringing too many choices and too many platforms that you have to rely on to buy your games, to play your games, to have friend lists on different games. Crossplay might or might not be enabled. It's just a mess and not a good experience for users. I think Stadia will bring fragmentation to an already exploded ecosystem. We have all the publishers running their own game stores with exclusivities, and I think Stadia is gonna go the exclusivity route as well, since they already announced that they have their own in-house studio to bring some games to the service. So since you have exclusivity deals, that means that you have yet another service and provider that might provide games that you might be interested in, but that you have to pay extra for or have another machine for. So I don't think that's a good thing for people in general. To be honest, I don't think Stadia will be a good success. I don't think Google will have the means or the goodwill of the providers and publishers to bring enough games to the service to make it a compelling value proposition. Now, latency and data caps will also mean that Stadia might be a success for you specifically, if the games are there, or a complete failure in certain countries. And that's the thing that we have to remind ourselves. I might be jumping ahead of myself, since Stadia is not out yet. We won't really know if Stadia is a good value proposition as long as we don't know which subscription model it will take, which games it will bring, and if it will run well with input lag and latency. So, on paper, I don't really like the concept, but we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, I will probably not hold my breath for this service. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little recap of what we know about Stadia as of now, what I think about it, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. In the meantime, I've been Nick, and goodbye. If you enjoyed, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications. You can also follow me on Twitter at TheLinuxEXP. Thank you guys for watching, and goodbye.